Ask you to answer 5 questions that are standard for the committee. We pose it to each nominee who appears before us. They just require a simple yes or no answer for the record. Do you agree to appear before the committee here and in other venues when invited?
Yes.
If confirmed, do you agree to send officials from your office to appear before the committee and designated staff when invited?
Yes.
Do you agree to provide documents or any other materials requested by the committee in order for us to carry out our oversight and legislative responsibilities?
Yes.
Will you both ensure that your office and your staff provide such materials that the committee when requested?
Yes.
Do you agree to inform and fully brief to the fullest extent possible all members of the Committee of Intelligence activities and covert action rather than only the chair and vice chairman where appropriate?
Yes, where appropriate.
I want to thank you very much. We'll now proceed to your opening statement. You're recognized.
Thank you. I have remarks thanking Saxby. He needs to leave, and I want to jump ahead just a little bit of what I am going to say in my written remarks to you, just to thank him, a great friend, someone I had the pleasure of serving under on this committee. He has left his mark in many, many ways, including friendship among his wife and Saxby, between Marcia and me. And I just want to thank him for being willing to come here today and to make these remarks on my behalf. Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, members of the committee, I'm honored to appear before you as nominee for the position of Director of National Intelligence. It was a great privilege to have of mine to have served on the Senate Select Committee, this Committee on Intelligence, and to see up close the great work done by all the members of the staff and their supporters. I'll admit, however, the view is a little bit different down here from up there. In fact, I recall many days sitting up there looking to who was ever down here and saying, I'm glad that's not me. Well, here I am. I'd like to begin by thanking President Trump for nominating me for the position of Director of National Intelligence. I'm humbled by his confidence in me and will work tirelessly to lead the world's, what I believe, and I think most believe, the finest intelligence enterprise in the world. I would like to also thank Vice President Pence, my Indiana colleague, and someone that I'm honored to call my friend, for his support. I deeply appreciate his faith in me. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the previous DNI, Jim Clapper, and his principal deputy, Stephanie O'Sullivan. Their stewardship of the intelligence community over the past years has been commendable, and their guidance in helping me prepare for this position has been most helpful. They left in place an experienced and a great team which have been instrumental in providing a smooth transition for the ODNI and for the IC. And also I want to recognize my fellow Hoosiers who have elected me several times to the House of Representatives and to the United States Senate over the past years. I've always done my best to represent them, and I'm honored by the confidence that they have put in me time and time again. And while I will always be a Hoosier at heart, if confirmed as the next Director of National Intelligence, I will represent the dedicated men and women of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the broader intelligence community to the best of my ability. And finally, saving the best for last, I would like to thank my wife, Marcia, my children, Laura, Lisa, and Andrew, who is here today. Together, my 3 children have produced, according to Marcia's and my observation, 10 almost perfect grandchildren. My career in public service is a direct reflection of my family's enduring support and love. And without their encouragement, I would not be sitting here today. It's been a long road of public service that's brought me here before you. After 34 years of service in the House, the Senate, and as U.S. Ambassador to Germany, I was ready to make a transition and planned to move on to a new chapter of my lifelong journey, back home again to Indiana. But as I have learned over those 34 years, life doesn't always work out the way you think it's going to work out. When called upon to consider this position, I first consulted my most important advisor, my wife, Marcia, as I examined the responsibilities of such a significant office. As a former teacher and family therapist, Marcia understands me probably better than anybody, and the importance of public service. She's the rock that provides stability and wise counsel, shoulder to shoulder with me in every aspect of my life. And while I'm no longer retiring from public service, what I am retiring, as I sit here today, is my policy hat. A hat I wore proudly for years as I represented the views of my constituents, offered policy proposals, made judgments, and cast votes in the committee and on the floor. That hat will be replaced. It's retired. But if confirmed, I put on a new hat, the D&I hat. And just as this government transitions to a new leadership, I too hope to transition to the role of Principal Intelligence Advisor to the President and all the duties that come with that. In this new role, it will be my responsibility to present the President, senior policymakers throughout the administration, and you, the Congress, with the best and most objective, non-political, and timely intelligence as you consider policies in the future for our great nation. The President and I have personally discussed my potential role as his principal intelligence advisor, and we both recognize that this position is frequently the bearer of unpleasant news. But if confirmed, my responsibility would provide him with the most accurate and objective and apolitical intelligence possible. In my various conversations with many of you prior to this hearing, I was asked about how I see the larger role as the D&I. Those who know me, and Saxby referenced this, that I'm an avid sports fan, and never more avid than this past year as I celebrated the seemingly impossible accomplishment of the Chicago Cubs after 108 years of effort, winning the World Series. So allow me to compare how I see my role as D&I using, well, not a baseball analogy, but a football analogy. On a football team, the players are guided by a variety of coaches. You see them standing along the sidelines. You wonder how many there are. One time I counted, and I thought there were 17, and I thought that meant something here relative to the number of agencies we look after. There's a coach for offense, a coach for defense, special teams, one for the offensive line, one for the defensive line, one for the quarterback, and on it goes. But every team has a head coach, that leader who walks the sidelines, and while not dictating to each coach, assistant coach, how to do their specific job, pulls each of these specialists together to form a seamless and focused team. I see the role of Director of National Intelligence as analogous to the head coach role for the intelligence community, integrating the IC and leveraging all the expertise in our community. We have immense talent resident in many of the agencies across the IC. Yet each one contributes unique capabilities or expertise that is necessary for a team to be, as a whole, successful. The unique access of our human intelligence sources and the detailed analysis from the Central Intelligence Agency, the important input from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the signals intelligence expertise of the National Security Agency, which I believe is second to none, the geospatial mastery demonstrated by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the acquisition proficiency of our satellite specialists at the National Reconnaissance Office, the force multiplier the intelligence elements of the armed services bring to this team effort, the domestic counterterrorism and counterintelligence work done by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the specialized skills of the IC elements resident within the Departments of State, Treasury, Justice, Homeland Security, and Energy. Like a head coach, I see it as my job to pull all of these team members together under the same game plan to produce the best coordinated and the best integrated intelligence we can find, to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And given the complicated threat environment that we face today in this country and around the world, now more than ever, the IC must work as a team. The threats that we face today are more challenging, dynamic, and geographically diffuse than ever before. Allow me to address, in no particular order, what I see as some of the most challenging issues we currently face, and I could spend a lot of time on this, so I will abbreviate and talk about just a few. Clearly, the rising cyber threat must be highlighted. Cyberspace is both a resource and a liability, an increasingly connected world that creates tremendous opportunities, but also many vulnerabilities. Not unrelated, I would also highlight the threat of radical Islamic terrorism, which continues to be a significant threat to the United States and its allies abroad. They're spreading their message of fear and hate through cyberspace and mobilizing to venues beyond their self-described caliphate. China's continued regional activism, including its disputed territorial claims in the East and South China Seas, is troubling and will be a long-term challenge for the United States. Russia's assertiveness in global affairs is something I look upon with grave concern, which we need to address with eyes wide open and a healthy degree of skepticism. And North Korea's nuclear ambitions and, quite frankly, provocations are something the intelligence community needs to be laser-focused on. The list continues with a diverse set of challenges, including those in Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, and other hotspots around the world. In order to address these threats, I will bring my years of experience in how to execute on a plan and bring together teams of people toward a common goal. As the ambassador to Germany from 2001 to 2005, I oversaw the activity of more than a dozen federal agencies at the American Embassy. I trust that my experiences coordinating and integrating that many different departments and agencies, overseeing their activities, leveraging their strengths, and bringing them together under a single strategy will serve me well as DNI. As a member of Congress in both the House and Senate, I've always had a keen interest, as hopefully you know, in ensuring that we are responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. In evaluating federal programs, I always made a point to ask questions about what works, what doesn't, and why. I also believed it was important to assess how we establish priorities. We must ask ourselves, in a time of tightened budgets, what programs are truly essential, and which may no longer be necessary or only partly necessary or of lower priority? How does each program support our overall goal or strategy? And is it duplicative of another effort? I will be looking to ask the IC and these and many more questions if confirmed as DNI. And in the vein of efficiency, there has been much discussion about the role of the DNI and the office of the DNI. Let me share with you what I have learned in preparation for this opportunity. Over the past 12 years, since its inception, the ODNI has been tasked with a variety of responsibilities, in statute, many in statute, in executive orders, and in presidential memoranda, along with recommendations coming from the 9/11 Commission and the Silberman-Robb Commission on WMD. The people supporting these directives are hardworking folks from all across the IC. Of note, a significant portion of the ODNI's workforce is on rotation from other IC agencies. As you know also, NCTC, an organization of 750 people created by the IRPTA law enacted in 2005, is counted in that number that we have, which is less than 2,000, and by the way, less than a third of the number of band members for the armed services. So that may put it in some perspective. ODNI was established to counter the pre-9/11 stovepiping by individual intelligence agencies and ensure collaboration and integration across the intelligence elements. The people who are supporting these directives are hardworking folks from all across the IC. ODNI brings together talent from across the community to integrate intelligence. It does its best to connect the dots. Not just specific dots from specific agencies and specialties. In keeping with my earlier football analogy, you can't play a complete game with just a star quarterback and a wide receiver. Maybe if you're the New York Patriots, you can pull that off once in a while, but I don't think that happens very often. But even the Pats need a strong offensive line, a stout defense, agile special teams, and a talented place kicker, along with many other players, to be the best in the business. Not every player on a football team is going to be the MVP, but they are a team nonetheless, and everyone on the field plays a critical role. And when we, the IC, succeed, we succeed as a team. If we come up short, we fail as a team, and we use that experience to address it so that it doesn't happen again. As I looked at the many requirements of the office reflected in various laws, orders, and recommendations, I have been impressed by the office's responsiveness to these many tasks within the reasonable resources that they have. Recent commentary on the size of the ODNI doesn't mesh with what I've seen firsthand, and I believe it does a disservice to this committee and your efforts to keep the size of OD&I in check, which is your obligation and my obligation. And that said, as I discussed earlier, I believe every government agency must constantly review its operations, and I'll be taking a look at not only the Office of the OD&I, but the entire IC, and try to learn how we can do things more efficiently and effectively. We don't have a choice. Much has been made publicly about the role of our intelligence enterprise and how it will fare in the future, and I'm encouraged by what I see. With the leadership team in place at the IC agencies, I know that this community will continue as the world-class intelligence enterprise it is today. Before going to questions, let me just share with you the early goals that, if confirmed, I will share with the IC. I intend to push the IC to be the best it can and not accept the status quo when it comes to the challenges facing our nation. I intend to ask the IC to be innovative in its approach to hard problems and the solutions to solve them. I intend to be a champion for the hardworking men and women of the IC. Be there for them the way they are here for all of us. Every day, the men and women of the IC are working tirelessly on the front lines, often in the shadows, oftentimes in very dangerous situations, with the common goal of keeping America safe and secure. I also intend to work with all of you, as a former member of the committee, to ensure you that the IC has support it needs to tackle whatever the opposing teams bring our way, and to ensure that the Congress and this committee have access to the information you need to conduct your oversight responsibilities. I am honored by the opportunity to be here today, and I thank you for your consideration of my nomination. And with that, I look forward to answering your questions.
Dan, thank you very much. Let me say for members, I'll recognize members in order of seniority for a 5-minute round. For those that need it, we will have a follow-up round. Just for members' timing, we'll go from the open hearing immediately when complete to a closed hearing for whatever period that might take, and that will be in our normal hearing room. With that, let me recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dan, you and Marcia had a good gig, retirement. She was excited. You were actually really excited, 34 years. Now you've agreed to do a job that many have called thankless. Why?
I've been asked that question many times at each step of the journey, and the response has always come down to a sense of duty. When asked to serve your country, whether it was in uniform, which I did for 2 years, or whether it was in the Congress or as an ambassador, and to run for the Senate again after quite a hiatus, and then to say yes to this job, I was reminded of the phrase that runs through my mind. I dreamt and believed that life was a beauty, and I think that's what I was looking forward to. I awoke and found that life is a duty. And so I believe when asked by your leader of your country to serve your country again, the answer needed to be yes.
I know you understand well from your experience on the committee how valuable raw intelligence can be to the oversight process. If asked by the committee, will you provide the raw intelligence and sourcing behind the intelligence community finished product and assessments?
I absolutely believe that is my responsibility and the responsibility of the IC to provide what this committee needs to do its oversight properly.
I noticed in your statement that you highlighted, and I quote, acquisition proficiency of our satellite specialists, unquoted, at the National Reconnaissance Office. I'm sure you probably agree, however, that the requirements development process for our satellites is in need of significant reform. Will you work with the committee to streamline that process to ensure that we can more quickly get to the design, build, and launch phase?
Absolutely. Agility is critical in this time of rapid technological change. We see, I believe, now 11 nations who have the capacity to launch instruments into space. I was shocked the other day to read that the nation of India, on one rocket launched, deposited more than 100 satellites in space. They may be small in size with different functions and so forth, but one rocket can send up, I think it was 111 platforms. We cannot afford to be behind the curve in terms of development of both the offensive and defensive capacities that we put up into space. And so streamlining that acquisition process is not something that, should be done. It's of utmost necessity that it has to be done.
There's been much discussion about the role that the Central Intelligence Agency played in the detention and interrogation of terrorist suspects as part of the RDI program. Those detention facilities operated by the CIA have long been closed, and President Obama officially ended the program 7 years ago. I think the debate space on this subject has become confused, and I'm certain that the law is now very clear. Do you agree that it would require a change in law for the CIA or any government agency to lawfully employ any interrogation techniques beyond those defined in the Army Field Manual?
I absolutely support that. That is the law. I might note for the committee, I'll bring it up if you don't. When that vote on the NDAA came up, the McCain Amendment, I was one of a few who did not support that amendment. First of all, I absolutely will follow the law in every aspect, regardless of what my personal thoughts might be. And I only had one reservation that I just couldn't reconcile in my mind. And I didn't vote no because I didn't think that's where we needed to go. I voted no because I thought, well, perhaps we ought to at least have a discussion about what do you do in a situation when you have the necessary intelligence to know that something terrible is going to happen to the American people in a very short amount of time, and you have a legitimate individual who can tell you where that radiological bomb or biological material is, and you don't have time to go through the process that the Army Field Manual requires. I'm not trying to, as I said, I took off my policy hat. I'm no longer engaged in that process. I follow the law that's there, and I ensure that the IC follows the law, and the answer to your question is absolutely. But I do think it's at least worth discussion relative to the situation that might occur where we might have to, hopefully with some special authority, might have to go outside that. I don't have a prescription for that. I'm not going to advocate for that. I'm simply trying to define what it was that going through my mind when that amendment came up, I thought we needed a little more discussion on that. But that was at the policy side, that hat's gone.
You noted in your opening statement that you intend to ask the intelligence community to be innovative in its approach to hard problems. I just want to say this, Dan. As you know, I've been pushing the community to innovate for many years, and I look forward to working with you and supporting this endeavor to change an IC community that looks forward with innovation as an opportunity, as has many on this committee. Turn to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me echo what the Chairman has said about satellites and our whole overhead capacity. I think you were part of many vigorous debates that we have to make changes in that field and think much more future-oriented and recognize, as you pointed out, both other nations moving in this area and tremendous opportunities within the commercial space. So I appreciate your answer on that. I do want to, as I mentioned in my opening statement, though, get you back on the record on a couple of items that I think are terribly important. I want to start again with an issue of great importance to me, and I believe this committee, and that is our current investigation into the Russian hacking attempts. Do you promise to fully and completely cooperate with the committee's investigation of the Russia election hacking including by turning over all requested IC cables, intelligence products, and other materials to the committee as promptly as possible?
I think it's our responsibility to provide you access to all that you mentioned.
And do you plan to continue any investigations the IC is carrying out or may carry out regarding Russia's active measures, especially as they refer to interference in elections in our country, or for that matter, countries around the world?
I think this is something that needs to be investigated and addressed. I have not seen the classified information that, as my colleagues may or may not know, the day you go sine die here and you're leaving the Senate, you lose your classification. You have to start over at zero. It took much longer than we had anticipated, and so I just received it last Thursday. I was back in Indiana last week helping try to close things down there to return here. And so I've not had the opportunity to be briefed on what the classified version of that investigation has come up with. So in answer to your question, yes, I think this is an issue. Russia has a long history of propaganda and trying to influence various nations' cultures and elections and so forth. It's happening in Europe now as we speak. But they seem to have stepped up their game. And they're using cyber and they're using sophisticated methods now that they didn't have before. And so I think it's a very key issue that we understand fully what has happened and how it's happened, and have a full report on that. I certainly will make sure the IC produces the intelligence access that you need to do your job.
I appreciate your answer. Obviously, one of the core functions of the IC, and as ODNI, you'll have to coordinate this as the analogy back to the coach of making sure that you speak truth to power. You've got a remarkable background, but you will be the first DNI who was not either career military, career intelligence, or a career professional diplomat. And again, similar to Mike Pompeo, bringing more of a political or a policy advocate. How will you ensure that the intelligence community will continue to provide unvarnished assessments to the President and his administration, regardless of any politics?
Well, that's our responsibility, and that's my primary responsibility, to make sure the intelligence community knows exactly what our standards are, what we can do and what we can't do. I want to make it very, very clear to all elements of the intelligence community that our job is to do our job. And our job is not to formulate policy. Our job is not to influence intelligence in any way for political reasons. Our job is to present as you said, truth to those who make policy decisions about where we go. And I will not tolerate anything that falls short of that standard.
Thank you. The chairman raised the issue around the current law in terms of the U.S. Army Field Manual on interrogation. I would simply point out that, every day in one form or another, the military deals with some form or another, the so-called ticking time bomb scenario. And, General Mattis has appropriately pointed out that he would not stray from the Army Field Manual because he feels that the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques just don't work. I would hope that you would echo again what you said in the last, that you would commit to following the law and not lead some effort to try to change that law.
I can absolutely say that I have no other obligation except to follow the law on that. I would say, I greatly respect the views of John McCain, who not only understands this, but has been subject to it, and General Mattis and his years and years of experience. I respect both of those, and I intend to be available to work with them and talk with them. But the goal is clear, the law is clear, and following what that law is my primary responsibility, and I'll adhere to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Dan, I don't really have any questions for you. You know, you sat right here for all the time that you did, and I know what your decision-making's like, and you and I wrestled with some of these tough decisions we had to make, and I know what your analysis is like, and I have absolute confidence. I think that was a great appointment by the President. Thank you, and especially thank Marcia for agreeing that that you could do this job. We really appreciate it. America appreciates it, and thank you for willingness to do that.
I just could comment. I've been sitting here looking at that empty chair. Who died?
There was a. Yeah. That's Senator Rubio's chair now, and
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not going to comment.
I hope he's not watching on C-SPAN. He'll be showing up through the door.
I'm not going to comment on the trade that was made here, but again, thanks so much. And as you know, they're remodeling your office that's next to mine on the fourth floor, Russell. And man, it's a mess. You know, I wish you hadn't left. To be honest.
Were you able to seize a new room on the other end there?
No, I wasn't. But
Chairman Blunt probably
try.
would try to help you in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see my former Finance Committee partner in the cause of bipartisan tax reform. I was a little baffled in all the references to football, since Hoosiers are about my game, basketball, but we'll talk about that another time. In January of 2017, the Intelligence Committee issued a written assessment that Vladimir Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Given Putin's preferences, how are you going to actually show our allies, with elections coming up, that the intelligence community will support them against Russian efforts to influence their elections?
Well, as I said earlier, Russia has a long history of doing this, although they stepped up their game and they're using more sophisticated tactics. As I also said, I have seen the classified version of this, but I think it's publicly known and acknowledged and accepted that Russia definitely did try to influence the campaign. To what extent they were successful, I don't think we know, but following through on that in terms of informing our allies of what we have experienced and what they're probably going to experience gives them, I think, the ability to better understand what the Russian efforts are. I think the transparency of what has happened is necessary for the American people so that when they make their judgments about future, whether future elections or whatever, they understand that there are outside forces trying to influence them one way or another. I do think this is an issue that ought to be looked at carefully, and there needs to be, frankly, a response. Vice President Pence at the Munich Security Conference, I was not there, but I've read his remarks, has said there needs to be consequences for what the Russians are trying to do.
What I hope we'll see is that because people are concerned that what happened to us will happen to them, that you'll make intelligence sharing with these countries a priority. And
I think that's already being done and needs to be done.
I wanted to hear it from you, but we'll move on. You've said that if you're confirmed, the reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act would be your top legislative priority. For years, I and members of Congress have been asking for an estimate of how many innocent, law-abiding Americans' communications are getting swept up in this collection. Will you commit to getting this number to this committee and the public before reauthorization?
Yes, I do. I'm going to do everything I can to work with Admiral Rogers and NSA to get you that number. I've been told it's an extremely complex process for a number of reasons. I said without a classification, I don't know what all those reasons are. I need to learn what they are, but I also need to share with Admiral Rogers the need, I think, to get this committee not just those numbers, but all the information they need in which to make a judgment as to the reauthorization. The intelligence community believes that the reauthorization is extremely important. It's a program that has provided a significant amount of intelligence relative to what foreign agents or individuals are trying to do to harm Americans. And so, you know, it has layers of oversight at all three levels of government. It has been examined by the PCLOB, the Privacy Civil Liberties Board, Overseeing Board, and supported by the FISA court. But this is something that you will be going through during this next year, and we want to make sure that you have all the information you feel you need in order to make whatever adjustments that Congress decides to make.
So you'll commit to making sure we have the number of innocent Americans being swept up before reauthorization. Will you commit to declassifying any secret legal interpretations related to FISA as well?
Well, that's something that I'll have to continue to work with you on. Obviously, I'm going to commit to do everything I can to try to get you that number. I need to find out why it's taken so long, what are the complications in getting that number, but I think it's important for
But this is declassification.
Well,
as
you
well
mentioned
as
the number also, but on the declassification, as long as it doesn't, I mean, the classification process is in place so that we can, if there are sensitive sources and methods that could be exposed that have negative consequences to our intelligence agency, we obviously have to classify those, but those that we can declassify for the needed purpose, I think we need to do.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just take a few more seconds as you did. My point is, and I appreciate what Senator Coates is trying to say here, A, we need that number. We have sought it for years and years. More and more Americans are getting swept up in these searches. We're trying to legitimately go after foreign targets that are a threat to us. Integrated, but as telecommunication systems become globally integrated, we need that number. We need declassification. Look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Senator Coates. We're delighted to see you. As the author, along with former Senator Joe Lieberman, of the 2004 law that created the Director of National Intelligence, I have a special interest in your nomination. I'm delighted that the President has chosen you for this important position, and I believe that he could not have made a better choice.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about the importance of the DNI serving, as the law provides, as the principal intelligence advisor to the President. I'm concerned about reports that the President is changing the composition of the so-called Principals Committee on the National Security Council by adding his chief strategist and downgrading, or so it appears, the role of the Director of National Intelligence. How will you ensure that you can fulfill the statutory mandate to serve as the President's top intelligence advisor at National Security Council meetings if this proposed reorganization goes forward?
That's a question that I have been addressing directly with the President and his staff. I was informed that the drafting of that executive order was not intended to not have the Director of National Intelligence as part of the Principals Committee. It was drafted on by President Bush's administration before the DNI was even stood up, and so they took language from that, never intending not to have the DNI be a part of the Principals Committee. I have been reassured time and time and time again from the President to his advisors that I'm welcome and needed and expected to be a part of the Principals Committee. It's essential to the process of being in a position to know what is moving on up to the National Security Council. Relative to the team, I have great confidence in General McMaster in terms of his putting together a team that he knows will be the most effective NSC team that he can. And I think relative to who is added or not added to that team will be under his jurisdiction, and that, as I said, I have very, very great confidence that he's going to put that team in place that he thinks can best serve the president.
Thank you. That's very reassuring, since I can't imagine having the deputy D&I on the deputies committee and then not having the D&I on the principals committee, which meets to resolve issues that are of the highest level that the deputies could not resolve. And surely the president should want to have his principal advisor on intelligent matters present at those very important meetings.
And I was ensured that that was the intent, and the other was just a mischaracterization of the executive order.
Thank you. A second issue that I want to raise with you is that President Trump has asked an individual who runs a private equity firm to lead a broad review of the U.S. intelligence agencies. As far as I can tell, this individual does not have national security experience, nor does he appear to have experience in intelligence. As you're well aware, the president can already receive independent advice from the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, which can provide outside advice regarding a full range of intelligence activities. So to have this additional review, particularly from an individual who does not appear to have the requisite background, appears to be a textbook definition of waste and duplication. In addition, in your statement, you talked very eloquently about the responsibility the DNI has to bring the intelligence agencies together to review, to make sure they're working effectively and efficiently. My concern is that an outside review by an individual without experience can result in recommendations that are essentially armchair quarterbacking of the leadership of the Intelligence Committee. Do you view it as your job to review the operations of the Intelligence Committee?
I do, and I've made that clear to the president and to his advisors that that is where I stand. Clearly, as I said in my opening statement, every agency needs to constantly review itself, particularly at a time when budget resources are restrained. Well, at any time, whether they are or not, we want an efficient, effective government, streamlined to efficiency. And so, but in terms of looking at that and assigning someone to that position, if it involves the intelligence community, I think that it needs to be under my authority, and I've made that very, very clear, and I believe that's what the case will be. Now, I know Mr. Feinberg personally. I think he's a patriot. He wants to serve his country, and he brings many talents to that, but I do not think that translates into reporting to the White House and not being under the control of the director of the the National Security Office. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just the DNI, which I ought to have that down pretty well, don't you think? The DNI. So I want to just assure you that that's an issue that I have been engaged in, and I have full confidence that that's the way it'll turn out.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
Welcome back, Dan.
Thank you.
I want to go back to a couple of some of the ground that Senator Collins covered, and I think most of us agree with your analogy. We want you to be the head coach. We're a little concerned that sometimes the owner of the team might rather hear from the offensive coordinator right now. And so some of these things with regard to the executive order, with regard to Mr. Feinberg of Cerberus, the appointment of the director of the CIA to the committee, they open a lot of questions for how you're going to maintain DNI's leadership role and the structure that has served the intelligence community so well after a period when we really realized stovepipes do not help American national security. So I want to make sure I understand what you said to Senator Collins. Do I understand that the executive order that came out that seemed to remove the DNI from the Principals Committee was a recycled Bush administration executive order that just didn't reflect current law and historical precedent since 2002?
That's my understanding. I wasn't there, of course, at the time. In the writing of that, I had no participation in that. That is my understanding. I cannot fully say that that's what exactly happened, but what has been told to me is that the intent was never to not have the DNI as part of the Principals Committee, and they reassured me very quickly that, look, they also were thinking there may be occasion when the committee is dealing with something that doesn't involve intelligence, perhaps a flood or something like that. And
I don't think any of us are worried about
you wouldn't be forced
that sort of a situation. I think we do want to be reassured. Well, one, I'm reassured with regard to your position. I think that's very important. I am not reassured as to the process that these executive orders have been going through, and given what I see as a pretty enormous omission. Let me move on to another issue with regard to encryption, and we've had this conversation a lot when you were here on the committee. It's something you're going to have to deal with, a very evolving situation moving forward. NSA Director Admiral Rogers called encryption the foundational to the future. I think Secretary Carter called encryption absolutely essential with regard to the Department of Defense, and he said, quote, "I'm not a believer in backdoors or a single technical approach to what is a complex and complicated problem. I'm just not. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's technically accurate," end quote. Other former IC leaders, Michael Hayden, Mike McConnell, Michael Chertoff, Mike Morrell, we have a lot of Michaels, have all made public statements of strong support for strong encryption and unequivocal opposition to so-called backdoors because of the risks inherent to them. Do you believe that strong encryption is an essential tool for the American public and private sectors to be able to protect personal, business, financial data from hackers, criminals, and malicious governments?
Yes, I do, and I think it's important, obviously, for the government, all government entities. We're all aware of the attempts to break into systems that deal with our defense, deal with our financial resources, deal with any number of things, and so encryption it has a very positive effect and is needed. We also have, though, the responsibility of trying to understand what those who are not using the internet for the right purposes. You know, we used to be separated by two wide oceans and felt we were pretty safe and we could always be ready for something was coming our way. Now, in fractions of a second, someone can hit a key and cause incredible damage to the United States in many, many ways, all across the spectrum. And so there are those occasions, I think, when we need to at least think about, and when we have legal authority to address a situation where we need to get information, cooperation from the public sector would be helpful. And I think that conversation has been going on, needs to continue going on. You know, the CEOs of companies that, are making devices and guaranteeing their buyers encryption, they worry about their families, they worry about their communities, they worry about attacks on the United States. And so, once again, I'm not in a policy position to decide how this happens, but I do think that it needs to be an ongoing discussion among policymakers in terms of what legal authorities. And in the end, we follow the law, whatever it is, regardless of our personal opinions.
Thank you, Chairman.
Well, it's great to have you back and great to have been on this committee with you and know that you have an important and in many ways unique sense of these issues. But also, we've watched as a committee and as a Congress the DNI operation grow beyond what at least I initially thought it would be. And I'm wondering, as you've had a chance to think about this, why do you think that has happened? And how much of it is a result of the Congress taxing the DNI with specific assignments rather than letting the DNI decide which agency should have that assignment? Or give me a sense of how you think that's developed and how your review of the other agencies would also involve a review of what the Director of National Intelligence and that entire operation under your daily management would look like.
Well, I've been asking the same question of the IC in regards to this. I have found that statutory requirements, executive orders, directives have added functions to the DNI that are mandated by the Congress or by the executive branch. Also, I think people don't understand that NCTC is part of the DNI. They have about 750 employees at the NCTC. I don't hear anybody calling for not having an NCTC, but by statute, under IRPTA, it was made part of the DNI. We have rotations that come. I think about 40% of the people there are rotated through. It's much like what the military has tried to do with their joint exercises and so forth. They want Navy to serve with the Army at a certain point and the Air Force at a certain point so that they are familiar with the whole and then can perform better service. They're not stovepiped, and it's somewhat similar to what the whole joint efforts under Goldwater-Nichols was trying to accomplish. And so it's a little more complicated than just, a little more than just the number. Oh, there's 1,750 people out there. Why do we need that many? It's those two factors have played a major role in that. Having said that, it doesn't mean that we can't take a hard look at that. How can we streamline? How can we be more effective? But simply taking a number of people here and putting them over there really doesn't change the dynamic if the reason that they're here is for integration processes, coordinating processes, and so forth. So to finish my remarks is simply, if you're going to integrate information that is coming from 16 other different agencies, you have to have members there from some of those functions that know what's coming from their function so that they can be part of the integration solution.
And do you think the Congress has rightly or wrongly created all those specific assignments for the DNI as opposed to either letting the DNI determine who had the assignment or making a assignment to one of the specific agencies and knowing that the DNI would be have oversight?
Well, it's probably a good question to ask Senator Collins. I know her initial intent, along with Senator Lieberman and others that put this together, had to work through the process of becoming law. I read an interesting book about what that 2.5 years was like in order to achieve that. And many times we have a vision here, and we have our staff write it up into law, and from the starting point to the ending point, we don't sometimes recognize it when it comes back with all the decisions that have been made in order to make adjustments so certain entities have this authority and that authority. So there is some fog in the air about the exact authorities of the DNI and the responsibilities that are left to other agencies. Clearly an overseer, someone who has some defined authorities, but not necessarily the authority to simply go into every agency and deal with their operations.
Well, I just conclude by saying on this topic, I think nobody is in a better position to work with the relevant committees of Congress to try to go back now and take a look at that law, what it was intended to do, whether it really has achieved what it was intended to do, and the advice you might have as you have a chance to look at this from both perspectives of what the next DNI might be able to deal with because of reforms and efficiencies that you build in while you have this job. And I look forward to you being part of this committee's activities for the next several years.
Thank you. Well, it's 12 years on, and it's probably time to take a look at it and say, as I said, what works, what doesn't, and why, and what changes can we make to make it be better.
Exactly, and I'd like for that to be one of the things that you determine is going to be one of your major goals.
That is one of my major goals.
Thank you. Senator Coates, I would first take issue with your analogy. I can assure you that the assistant coaches of the New England Patriots would be astonished to think that Bill Belichick is as passive as you would portray him. You've got to be more aggressive. This isn't a passive role, Senator. Let me move on to my only concern about your nomination. You're one of the most likable, affable, easygoing people I've ever met. I like traveling with you and working with you on this committee. I'm not sure likability and affability are the qualities I want in this position. I want somebody who's crusty and mean and tough, because you're riding herd on 17 agencies that will always want to be going in different directions, and you're going to be reporting to a president who may or may not want to hear what you have to say. Can you assure me that not only are you changing hats when you go into this job, but you're going to be hard in terms of your execution of this, I think the second most important job in the United States government right now?
Well, achieving the level of Bill Belichick may be tough. I haven't seen any other NFL coaches achieve the level of Bill Belichick. So that's
both in attitude and success.
But I hear exactly what you're saying, and I think the office demands it, and I think the times demand it. Clearly, we're not in a passive situation from a world threat standpoint.
Right.
It has reached the level that we can't afford not to go at this with everything that we have.
And to put a point on this, the three most serious foreign policy mistakes in my lifetime are the Bay of Pigs, Vietnam, and the invasion of Iraq. All of those were based upon configuring intelligence to meet the desires of the policymakers. That's the common thread that runs through. The pressure on you to try to meet the demands of the policymakers, and it just happened on Saturday when allegedly the Trump administration, the White House, put pressure on the Department of Homeland Security Intelligence and Analysis to come up with a justification for the travel ban rather than asking what's the story on people from these countries. They gave them the answer and said, give us the evidence. This, did you understand? Have you heard about this incident that just was reported this past weekend?
I read that in public media, yes.
Does that concern you?
As I said in the beginning, and as I will say frequently to both the president and to the executive branch, you need to fully understand my role. And my role is to provide you with intelligence to formulate policy, not formulate policy, not be a spokesman for any political decisions that are made. Yes, I have made this clear. I will continue to make this clear. I cannot go outside the bounds of my authorities, and I believe those authorities require me to do nothing less than what I just said.
Quick yes or no question. Do you need this job?
No, I don't need this job. One of the benefits of being in your generation together, I think, as I look at the panel here.
I don't know what you're talking about. No, you gave the right. That's the right answer.
You and I go back all the way to the Big Bay of Pigs, and all the way to Vietnam.
And
we've been experienced. If we haven't learned anything from these incidents, then shame on us.
That's right. And I want you to remember, because there is going to be a moment when you're going to have to say, I don't need this job because I'm being asked to do something that I shouldn't do. I'm not predicting that will happen, but that could happen. It's happened, and this isn't about this president or any other president. It's happened, as we both pointed out, over the past 40 years. A couple of follow-up questions on the national security. I don't know where the language came from, but the language says that where instances, you're invited where instances pertaining to the DNI's responsibility and expertise are to be discussed. I can't imagine a situation where that wouldn't be the case. I'm worried that you said, well, if it's a problem, we'll fix it. It should be fixed now. You shouldn't be welcome at these meetings. You should be part of these meetings. And I would urge you to talk to the White House about this executive order that was issued barely a week after the president was in office about correcting that fault. And the second fault in that was to put Steve Bannon, the president's political advisor, onto the National Security Council. I understand that President Bush forbade Karl Rove from even going to National Security Council meetings, let alone being on it. And I hope you will go back and take that message. Admiral Mullen says this is politicizing intelligence from our national security from the beginning, and I think that's a very bad practice.
Thank you, Senator. I'll take that message back to the President.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Dan. Just to Senator King's concern, I sat next to you here for a couple of years, and I found him to actually be quite an unpleasant human being on many occasions. Of course, everyone who knows you knows that that's not true, but we're fortunate and grateful that your willingness to continue to serve our country. The three topics I wanted to touch, the first is kind of this unusual situation that we now have regarding counterintelligence in particular, and it's this sort of synergy that combines the strategic placement of illegally accessed information, the use of media organisms under the control of foreign governments, RT and Sputnik and the like. There's always been an element of propaganda involved in politics, but the sort of synergy between propaganda, counterintelligence, for purposes of interfering, influencing, and manipulating, directing elections, policymaking in foreign countries, I think has reached a level that in many places, from in Europe and I believe even in the United States, that's unique. And I just want, and you may have touched on this earlier, but this is a challenge that is perhaps a bit different from what we have been dealing with in the intelligence community over the last decade, and certainly since post 9/11, and that is not just that foreign governments have intelligence agencies that target us, but that in fact they strategically use information potentially to have an influence over our policymakers, our policy making, and potentially even our elections. And so that new dynamic, how do you view the multiple different agencies kind of synergizing all of that and to confront this new element that I still think we're grappling with fully understanding?
Yeah, I did mention earlier that the advances in technology have upped the games of those who want to use these techniques, and the digitization of the world and the links through the worldwide internet have been marvelous advances for mankind, but have extreme vulnerabilities also, and can be taken advantage of. I think we need to educate our public to the fact that these types of things are happening, so that in their factoring in terms of their decisions relative to government and government's functions and elections and so forth is not. They're well aware of the fact that they can't just simply believe everything they hear and everything they read. That there are these efforts out there to undermine who we are as a country, undermine some of our values, cause us to lose confidence in our government's ability to protect their privacy, et cetera. So I do think that requires much more agility, much better means of not only intercepting these, but putting not only the defenses in place, but offenses response to know that so that those that are doing this, there's a consequence to what they're doing.
And I would just add that given the fact that this kind of touches upon the intelligence community so heavily, there's always this tension between allowing the American public and for that matter our allies to understand what's happening, and yet allowing the intelligence community to continue to work in ways that don't.
All right, folks, we'll be back in just a few minutes. We have to shut down the stream. For some reason, there's a lot of buffering. It has to do with the feed. So we will come back up online in just a few minutes while we fix this. And don't forget, click the link in the description below for tonight's president address to the Senate, to the Congress, and hope to see you guys on the chat. Again, we'll come back with this in just a few minutes. We have to see what's going on, what's wrong with it, but we'll be back.